You're listening to the Easy Feed Podcast, episode number 91, Bread School, how to choose better breads for our family.
Hi there, I'm Karina Savage, and with over 20 years experience feeding children, including my own, I've learnt all the secrets that busy mums need to get their children eating better and actually enjoying healthy foods. So a huge welcome to the Easy Feed Podcast.
Welcome back. It's great to have you. I hope that you are really, really well. I hope you've had a great start to the week. And yeah, oh my goodness, we are well into the term, aren't we? I can't believe we're already over halfway and school holidays are going to be upon us again soon. Today, I wanted to chat about something that pops up very often. In fact, we've been chatting a lot about it inside my membership lately. It's bread, okay? And bread is everywhere. Bread is a staple. Bread is life for some of us, and bread is very uncomfortable for others, in those that have, tricky gut issues. But bread is everywhere, and I really think it's important to understand that bread is not evil. For most of us, bread can be a really healthy part of the diet. I think, I hate that word diet, but healthy part of our life. I think bread's been given a really bad rap over the years, especially in relation to weight loss. And sure, there are some that don't do well with a lot of white carbs and bread, but on the whole, bread, especially for kids, is a really integral part of their day. And so it's the foods that they're having all of the time that are the ones that we need to be paying attention to and making sure that we're giving them half decent bread. So it's not loaded with rubbish and it's going to give them a little bit of nutrition. So I want to talk about bread today. I was going to call this podcast episode Bread Education or Bread School. I think we landed with bread school as possibly a little bit more easy to understand. But yeah, anyway, let's dive into the bread aisle because, well, actually, it's not necessarily the bread aisle. It could be the could be the bakery. Because often people will get their bread from, say, Baker's Delight or a bakery, especially if you're needing to or wanting to go for those more specialized kind of sourdoughy style options. Having said that, there's now plenty of sourdough available in the mainstream supermarkets. Oh, it takes me back down memory lane though, when my nonna was around and I used to go into the David Jones Adelaide Rundle Mall. We used to go downstairs, and back then, so I'm talking about 20 or would be now I'm showing my age. It would be probably more like 30 years ago now. And back then, like my nonna used to go into David Jones and into the mall and get her hair done. And I used to go in there sometimes and meet her. She didn't get her hair done in David Jones, by the way, but it was in the mall at a hairdresser. And then we would meet up and she would go down to this food court down in Rundle Mall in the David Jones. And I remember there was this specific bakery. It was in the corner and it made the most beautiful bread. And I remember what I used to get is this brioche roll, literally all for myself. It was like a decent sized brioche. It wasn't like sorry, I shouldn't say roll, it was a loaf. And she would buy it for me, and I would just literally eat it straight out of the paper bag, like holding it with my two hands because it was that big. Like, you couldn't hold it with one hand. It wasn't like a roll size, it was a loaf. It was this brioche loaf, but it was so delicious, and I must say I've always loved bread. Like, I'm a pretty big carb person. I love bread and butter, and, it's one of those things that, they say, what would be the 3 foods that you take to an island if you're stranded on an island? And bread and butter would be one of mine because probably I don't know if that counts as 2 or 1, but, it's right up there because I love bread. I love bread, and yeah, I just have such fond memories. I think, yeah. And I don't love bread just because of the memories from my nonna. I love bread because it's just delicious. But I do have really fond memories, and it relates back to brioche and David Jones. So there you go. Shout out to all the people that are living in Adelaide. And that's not there anymore. It's gone. It's been replaced. But yeah, I'm sure you can find decent, delicious brioches still somewhere. But yeah, still remember that to this day. So the bread is delicious and bread is to be enjoyed, but as I said, if kids are having bread all of the time, multiple times a day, then we need to be choosing bread that is going to be nourishing them. So it's not like the brioche that you get, once a fortnight, once a month. Like if they're having bread multiple times a day, we need to make sure that it's a good bread. We need to make sure that it's not loaded with nasties that they are consuming 4 or 6 slices of a day, because especially if you've got really active kids or teenagers that just go and get another piece of bread and Vegemite or toast and Vegemite, they start to really it starts to really add up in terms of the number of slices that they have per day. So what do we even look for? The other day I was asked inside my membership, which is a better option? Is it better to have wholemeal bread that's, I guess, cleaner, that has, because we were chatting about this new brand of bread that's just come out, and it looks really good. And one of my members posted the picture of it inside our group and said, "Hey, what do you think about this, Karina?" And I said, "Well, it looks great." And then a number of the other members were like, "Yeah, yeah, we're about to try it too. We've seen it in the shops." And one of the mums said to me, "Is it better to have a clean wholemeal bread like that doesn't have any of the additives or preservatives? Or is it better to have the more processed bread that is fortified with iron that may have more additives?" And I said to her, it's actually better to have the cleaner wholemeal option, because naturally whole grain wheat contains iron. So naturally that bread will contain iron anyway. So sure, going for the fortified one, you're getting iron and zinc, and they're two nutrients that are commonly low in fussy eaters. But from a cleanliness perspective and from a general health perspective, it's probably better to go for the cleaner bread option, which doesn't have any additives. It's a very clean ingredients list, and you're still going to get the benefits of the whole grain and the fiber. Well, whole grain ground up is wholemeal. So if it's wholemeal, you're still going to get fiber and whole grain benefits there. So, yeah, it's a great question and something that I think can be a little confusing. So let's dive into the different types of bread and how to choose the best bread for your family, because honestly, it can feel like a nutrition maze when you stand there in the supermarket and you look at the 50 million different options. It's like, well, what do I choose? Do I choose the high fiber white? Do I choose the one with the hidden grains? Do I choose the low GI one? And sometimes the choice is not yours because your child dictates what they will and won't eat. They'll only eat white, or they won't eat grains, but they will eat wholemeal. So sometimes we lose a little of the choice just because our kid's fussy. So, and I've certainly kind of found that over the years with, I used to be able to get grainy bread into my kids, but then we sort of somehow along the way lost the grains and moved over to wholemeal. So look, that's fine. Pick your battles. I mean, I think I can get some grains into my son, especially sometimes. My daughter's very textural. She does not like the bits. She is a little more, I would say, sensory with her feeding preferences. So she just doesn't like bits. I'm like, okay, sure. But she will eat wholemeal sourdough. So I'm like, great. Well, let's go with that. It's like, pick your battles, right? So, yeah, there's whole grain, there's wholemeal, there's white, there's high fiber white, there's low GI white, there's sourdough, there's rye, there's oat, there's gluten free, there's low carb, there's high protein, and then there's all the bakery style breads. And then there's the brioches, and the list go on. I'm not really gonna talk about brioches anymore today apart from my little story, because they're not typically the breads that you have every day for kids. So I'm gonna focus more on the day-to-day breads and what they contain and which ones are better choices, because at the end of the day, we're just aiming to choose the most nutritious option that your child will actually eat. Okay, so the goal is to choose the most nutritious option that your child will actually eat. Now, before we go any further, I just wanted to let you know, and I just need to double check the actual web URL, but I'm pretty sure if you head to my website, I'm just typing it up madly as we speak. There we go. If you head to my website, nourishwithkarina.com, my name's spelled Karina. Then if you go blog/bread, and then you will find my blog on bread. where I summarize everything that I'm talking about today. So that will be a useful resource for you once you finish listening to this podcast episode. And I must say, please leave me a review. If you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, wherever you're listening, please try to leave me a review. It just helps the podcast get out to more parents so we can help more parents. That would be amazing. So, as I said, bread can absolutely be a part of a healthy, balanced, there's that word again, diet eating plan for kids. I try so hard not to say that word. Um, but at the end of the day, we just need to look at the whole picture. So when you're going to grab that loaf of bread off the shelf, the kind of things that I look for or think about are, is it whole grain? Is it wholemeal? Is it highly processed? And as I said, sometimes that decision or that choice gets taken away from us by the type of bread that the child will eat. So you kind of have to temper these suggestions and guidelines based on your child and your family. But knowledge is power, and knowing the better choices and the worst choices is going to help you choose between two options for your child. So it may be that you're choosing between two white breads, one that's iron fortified and one that's not, that lower in GI and higher in fiber. So just choosing between those two, you could still be making a better choice, especially if you're choosing the one that doesn't have the preservatives. So there's always generally going to be a choice still, depending on how fussy your child is. And hopefully, this information helps you make more powerfully healthy choices for your children and for your family because you're eating the bread too. Well, chances are you're eating the bread too. So I look at how grainy is it? I look at the fiber. So I look at the fiber per 100 grams. And generally, I mean, on the better ones, you're going to get probably about 6 grams of fiber per 100 grams, sometimes more. But that's a really good number to aim for, about 6 grams of fiber per 100 grams, because, often it's lower than that. It's interesting actually because when they make wholemeal bread, they actually ground up all the grains. And so wholemeal bread often has higher fiber content than the whole grain bread. But at the end of the day, the whole grain bread is still a better option. Anyway, we'll get into all of that. But looking at the fiber per 100 grams is a good one. And I've alluded to it already, but it's really important to look at the ingredients list. How long is the ingredients list and does it contain a lot of additives, preservatives, emulsifiers, or gums? So, how processed is this bread? And then at the end of the day, the bottom line, the number one question. And then at the end of the day, the number one question is, will they eat it? And so that's got to be factored into it, right? As one parent to another, I know that completely. Now, the best bread is not always going to be the one with the biggest health claim on the front of the packet. The front of the packet is always just the sale, it's always the marketing. The back of the packet tells the truth. So, if you see no artificial colors or flavors, there's every chance there's going to be a preservative in it. So, just be mindful of the deception that occurs. You're probably already mindful of it because I'm preaching to the converted. If you're listening to me, you care about nutrition and you like listening to really geeky, detailed stuff about food and nutrition. So you're probably already aware of that. But if you're not, then just really be careful because at the moment we just cannot trust what is on the front of the packet. Okay, let's start with whole grain bread. Whole grain and grainy bread, they're usually my top choices. And that's because when we're talking about whole grain bread, whole grain means all the parts of the grain are present. You've got the bran, you've got the germ, and the endosperm. Okay. So when we're talking about whole grain, we're talking about the entire part of the grain being present. The bran, which is the outside, the germ, and the endosperm, which is the inside. So, what this means is you are getting all of the valuable nutrition from the outside, the middle, and the inside of the grain. And each part has really valuable nutrition. So, the outside part is higher in fiber, more protective. The inside, the endosperm, is higher in things like omegas. And the middle part is higher in carbohydrate and starch. But when you consume whole grains, they naturally provide more fiber, B group vitamins, vitamin E, magnesium, zinc, iron, antioxidants, and other plant compounds that you don't get when you're having white refined bread. Whole grain breads are usually more filling too, and better to keep our kids' energy levels more sustained throughout the day because they do take longer to digest. So, for children, this typically means better concentration and focus because their energy levels are more stable. It improves their fiber intake and their gut health benefits from that. And typically, so does their bowel regularity and their bowel health. And it can also help with appetite regulation and the microbiome in their gut because they are getting more fiber rich foods. Because fiber, or the sexy name for it is prebiotics, feed the beneficial gut bacteria, which produce important compounds that help nourish our gut lining and support our overall health. So, you're choosing grainy bread for multiple reasons, not only for stable blood sugar levels and stable energy levels, stable concentration and focus, but you're also internally feeding the gut microbes, which in turn keeps you much healthier. So, it keeps your kids healthier. Now, granted, not all of us are going to be able to get whole grains into our kids. So, wholemeal will be the next best option. And we'll talk about that in a sec. But really just look for the percentage of whole grains and try and aim for a higher percentage of whole grains where possible. Look at the fiber. So, actually, on that, I should say, on the ingredients list, they will typically put the percentage of whole grains present. So, you can see whether it's 15%, linseeds or 16% mixed grain, whatever it is, have a look at the percentage of whole grain. So that's going to be a helpful thing for you. And then look at the fiber per 100 grams and see if you can get it over 6. If it's 5, it's still a good option. You want to avoid sugar in the ingredients list, and you really want to try and avoid additives and preservatives where possible. And I know it's confusing. There's so many stupid names and numbers for these things these days, but at the end of the day, if your grandmother wouldn't know what it was, probably avoid it because it's likely to be an additive. A shorter ingredients list is always going to be better. Okay, sourdough bread. Let's talk about sourdough bread for a minute before I move on to wholemeal because sourdough bread traditionally is made using a fermented starter culture. Now, this starter culture naturally contains like a wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria. So it's a longer process. So the true sourdough is made using this fermented starter culture, not baker's yeast, which is sometimes used with sourdough. So yeast is present in true sourdough, but it's usually that wild yeast from the starter, not the commercial baker's yeast that's added to speed up the bread making process. And the wild yeast helps the bread rise, while the lactic acid bacteria creates that like tangy flavor. And the fermentation that makes sourdough, and it makes it different from standard yeast bread, means that the nutrients are a little more activated. So, this longer fermentation process with the lactic acid bacteria actually benefits us nutritionally because what happens when there's a longer fermentation process happening, it actually helps to reduce the what they call anti nutrients. So, things that can actually bind to essential minerals and block them from being absorbed into your body. It actually helps us access more of the nutrition, more of the vitamins and minerals in the bread. So that fermentation process actually activates vitamins and minerals for our body, making it easier for us to access and absorb the nutrition from those whole grains. So that's a really beneficial process for us. And what also happens with that fermentation process is it actually helps to lower the GI. So what that means is if you're comparing regular white bread and sourdough white bread will release more slowly into the bloodstream. So the sugar will release more slowly into the bloodstream because of that fermentation process. So sourdough bread is always going to be a better option if it's in the white category compared to regular bread. Same goes for wholemeal because wholemeal bread is slightly higher GI in the regular bread world, but when it's a wholemeal sourdough, it helps to slow down that GI a little bit. So at the end of the day, if you're choosing white, I would choose the sourdough option. If you're choosing wholemeal, I would choose the sourdough option. If you're choosing grainy, you're probably going to get more grains in a regular whole grain bread than sourdough because often they don't put that many grains in the sourdough. But at the end of the day, sourdough is still a great option and the grains will be probably more activated. So, look, it's kind of actually a bit of a 50-50 there. It's really at the end of the day, whichever one you can access and whichever one your child's gonna eat. So just have a look at how grainy it is because at the end of the day, the more grains, the better. But yeah, sourdough is a great option. Some bread, though, marketed as sourdough may not be true sourdough. And if you're seeing baker's yeast and it not looking too sort of spongy with big air pockets and it doesn't really taste kind of that tangy taste that sourdough does, then it may not be true sourdough. So just be mindful about that. True sourdough tends to have that chewy nature, doesn't it? Perfect with avocado or peanut butter. A traditional sourdough will typically only have a few ingredients on it, something like flour, water, salt, and a sourdough culture. Okay, let's move on now to wholemeal bread. Wholemeal bread is a great middle ground option, especially for children who will not yet eat grainy bread. And I love saying the word yet because it means that one day they might, okay? One day they likely will, but not yet. And that could be years, but that's okay. As I said, we're at the wholemeal stage at the moment, and that's fine. So wholemeal bread is made from the whole grain still, and those whole grains have been ground up. So yes, there's a little bit of nutrition that's lost in that process, but at the end of the day, it's still really high in fiber and really high in nutrients and a good source of iron naturally. Because the grains have been ground up a bit, as I said, the glycemic index, the release of sugar into the bloodstream is a bit higher than whole grain bread, but wholemeal bread can still be a very good option. So if you can get your child to move from white to wholemeal bread, then that's amazing. That's a great win. So I would be really happy with that. And wholemeal bread is often much better accepted than grainy bread. When choosing a wholemeal bread, I would look for wholemeal flour listed first rather than second. So you don't have white flour and then wholemeal flour. You get the wholemeal flour first. I would look at the fiber per 100 grams and aim for at least, 5 or 6 and aim for that 5 or 6 per 100 grams if possible. I would look for a shorter ingredients list. I would make sure sugar wasn't added if possible and just check for those additives and preservatives. So there's a huge variety of wholemeal bread options. Bakery options can be really good as well. And they won't have the additives and preservatives often. So wholemeal bakery bread like a Baker's Delight could be a great option. Okay, now let's move on to low GI bread. Low GI bread has been used by parents for many, many years now. And I think it makes us feel a little bit better about our children eating white bread because at least it's not a fast sugar, right? At least they're not getting a quick hit and then they're hungry again 20 minutes later. So low GI bread can definitely be useful from that perspective because it is digested more slowly. They've added in a fiber that helps to slow down the release of the carbohydrate, of the sugar into the bloodstream, leading to a much slower, more gradual rise in blood sugar levels in kids. So, this is beneficial from a concentration and focus perspective, also mood. You do need to be mindful, though, that many low GI breads don't necessarily have the vitamins and minerals that we are looking for because sometimes they just add in the fiber to make it low GI, but they're not really adding in any other nutrition. And so you're really just relying on the little bit of nutrition that is in the white bread, which is really the wheat, the whole grain that has been stripped. So the bran, the outside's been removed. Some of the inside's been removed. It's really just mainly the middle part, that middle starchy part of the grain, that's ground up and bleached, and that's what's used to make the white flour, which is what's used to make the white bread. So there's not as much nutrition, vitamins and minerals in that white bread. They do add that fiber to make it low GI, but in terms of the overall nutrition, you're not gonna get nearly as much nutrition from a bread like that. Sometimes you can find these white breads that have been fortified with iron and zinc and whatnot. And certainly there are some on the supermarket shelf that are good that don't have the additives and preservatives. But also, there are a number of them that are fortified with zinc and iron and whatnot. And again, this is something that we talk about a lot in the membership because they do have those additives and preservatives. And so it's really important to check that if you are choosing a white bread that is fortified, that you are choosing one that doesn't have preservatives in it. And look, at the end of the day, if your child is at that low GI white stage, I would probably just go for a bakery option if you can, or just try and find one with a simple ingredients list that didn't have those preservatives and limited emulsifiers and whatnot. Just try to keep it simple because at the end of the day, there's always nutritious partners that you can put the white bread with. So you could put the white bread with peanut butter, or you could put the white bread with avocado. And that's going to make a difference to the overall nutrition profile of that meal or snack. So there's always things that we can do to improve their nutrition. If they're stuck on the white bread stage at the moment, there is no judgment, there is no guilt. Perhaps just try and choose a cleaner white option. And yes, if it's low GI or high fiber, great. Start there and then try and add some nutritious partners to that white bread. So high fiber white bread would be very similar to the low GI white bread because basically what they've done is they've added a fiber to help lower the GI. So when you see high fiber slash low GI or just low GI, typically they're going to mean a very similar thing. They've added a fiber to it to slow down the release of sugar into the bloodstream. So typically it's a white bread that they've added this fiber to. They don't typically add it to wholemeal or whole grain breads. But it's certainly where a lot of fussy eaters are at, and that's absolutely fine. So if you're buying the white, high fiber, low GI bread for your child, absolutely fine. As I said, just try and put it with a nutritious partner. And if they will have nothing on their toast except for Vegemite, then perhaps put something next to it that's got protein or healthy fats or fruit. At the end of the day, it's trying to have a mixed meal in their stomach that's not just white. That's what we're aiming for. Because whenever you can add protein or fat or fiber to the white, you're always going to slow down the release of that sugar and bring in valuable nutrients. Okay, let's just move on to a couple of others. So we have rye bread. Rye bread can be a wonderful option. It's very dense. Rye can be a high fiber option and can have a lower GI. So super healthy option, but it does have a very strong flavor and not very popular, I don't think, with kids. I don't really love rye either. So I must say I don't really ever buy rye, but rye is a healthy option. Just check the ingredients list. We have oat bread as well. Oat bread can be a great choice. Oats provide a soluble fiber called beta glucan, so really good for cholesterol. I must say, I don't see too many oat breads out there, but there are oat breads. There are also low carb breads and high protein breads, but to be honest with you, just stick to the normal bread. I think the most important thing to look for is the fiber, the whole grains, the ingredients list, nice and simple and clean. They're the main things. Kids don't need low carbs and high protein breads. Really, at the end of the day, I would just be sticking to the healthy, simple stuff that we were talking about. And often with the gluten free diet, fiber can be compromised. So it's really important if you are choosing a gluten free bread for your child to try to find one with grains. And there absolutely are grainy options. I don't see too much in the way of wholemeal gluten free. I don't know why, but I just don't see it. Maybe the gluten free grains don't grind up as well, or the taste just isn't as good when they're ground up. So if your child does have celiac or for whatever reason you're avoiding gluten, try where possible to have gluten-free grainy bread or pair it, as I said, with a nutritious partner that's going to bring in valuable nutrients. So I hope that's given you some insight into the different types of breads and what I would look for. I guess overall, my general ranking would be number one, a whole grain bread with a simple ingredients list. Number two, whole grain sourdough or wholemeal sourdough. Number three, a clean wholemeal bread, preferably from a bakery or even supermarket with no additives and preservatives. Number four, your supermarket wholemeal bread, but just be mindful of your additives and preservatives there. Number five, I would go for a high fiber, low GI white bread. Or that's probably where I would also put in the white sourdough. And then number six, your standard white bread. But look, there is no judgment. Work with where your child's at and just try and find the best bread option for where your child's at. And remember, we can always put healthy stuff or healthier foods with the white bread if that's where they're at. At the end of the day, bread is an important part of our life. Well, I think it is. And so just do the best you can. The goal is never perfection, but small little improvements, especially with the foods that they eat consistently, that's where you're going to get the best. That's where your focus needs to be. And that's all you need to do. As I said, check out my blog, nourishwithkarina.com/blog/bread. And I look forward to chatting with you more next time. Have a beautiful week. Bye for now.